From your experience, what are some misconceptions that people usually have? I've spoken to many clients right across the board, and everybody has a different perspective to it.
Well, the biggest misconception that I've come across is people thinking that we don't need a financial plan. The golden eggs are your assets, but the goose is the income that provides these eggs for you. And that's the first thing that you should do.
Hi everyone, welcome to Chat with Chen, your host and managing principal here at WealthBridge. We have a very special guest here today, Vince. Vince will be joining us to be able to talk to us about different financial planning aspects. He brings a lot of experience. He's been in the industry for more than 35 years, coaching advisors right across various different platforms, and he's going to be sharing some tips with us that's going to be helpful for towards your journey in building a sound financial plan. Vince, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Chen. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Vince, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and then we'll get started from there.
Sure. As you mentioned, I've been in the financial services industry for 35 years. It's been a passion of mine. I was born, raised, and educated in Toronto and got into the world of financial planning right out of university.
Amazing.
Spent some time as an advisor, but most of my time has been, as you said, in the management and coaching and educating of advisors on how to conduct their practices.
Amazing, amazing. Let's talk about financial planning. It's a topic that some people love, some people hate.
Yeah.
There's always, there's never a right answer as to how to do certain things. A lot of people find it confusing sometimes, very frustrating at the end of the day. Talk to us a little bit about, can we break down what financial planning is, what a financial plan is?
All right. Yeah. Look, I think financial planning is understanding where you are now financially,
Okay.
understanding where you want to be in 10, 20, 30 years. And financial planning is working with an expert like yourself, creating a document on how you're going to get to the destination. Today, we live in a society, Chen, where if you're going to take a car trip, and you're not 100% sure where you're going, you're going to get in your car, you're going to punch in the address on the GPS, and you're going to follow its instructions.
Yeah.
Well, what a financial plan is, it's a GPS for your finances.
Right.
You're going to punch in with the work of an advisor where it is you want to be financially in 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And the written document and the work with the advisor will be the GPS that gets you there.
Yeah. And when you say where are we going to go, I'm assuming it's different for different people at the end of the day, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the goals would be, what are some common goals that a lot of people would have? Like, in your experience working with a lot of people, what are some of the common goals across Canadians at the end of the day?
Get out of debt as soon as possible, pay off their mortgage, have saved enough so that they can send their kids to university or college, hopefully being able to retire at 60 or 65. Making sure that they're always going to be able to provide for their family when the time comes, and accumulating some wealth so that they can enjoy the fruits of their labor.
Yeah, so it's short term, it's long term, it really depends on you as a person. What do you want to be able to accomplish financially, and how do we sort of get there at the end of the day, right?
Exactly.
From your experience, what are some misconceptions that people usually have? Because I know I've spoken to many clients right across the board, and everybody has a different perspective to it. Some people think financial planning is a waste of time, especially in this economy, because it's not going to work and they're never able to control certain things at the end of the day. While when I speak to others, they think financial planning is everything. So they don't even take a simple step without sort of, adhering to a financial plan. What are some common misconceptions that you come across just in general?
Well, the biggest misconception that I've come across is people thinking that we don't need a financial plan. It'll somehow take care of itself.
Yeah.
Right? We'll get to where we want to get to by chance.
Right.
And that doesn't happen. It is unbelievable, Chen, that I think the latest report I read indicated that over half of Canadians do not work with an advisor, do not have a written document.
Right.
I think another misconception is individuals thinking that they have to have a lot of wealth or a lot of assets before they work with a financial advisor or before they work with a creating a financial plan. And that you can't be further from the truth. If you are 23 and you've just started your first job and you might still be single, you need a plan.
Right.
If you are a family with 2 kids and you need a plan. Even if you're in your 60s and you're wondering what retirement looks for you, am I going to have enough money to last me the rest of my life?
Yeah.
You can use a plan. So anyone in any life stage, definitely can use working with an advisor.
Got it. And Vince, can you break down some of maybe the components or sort of how would you approach financial planning in general for a client? And of course, I understand it is very specific to a client, so obviously it can be the conversation here could be a guideline for someone, but it's not exact a financial planning recommendation for a specific client because we're taking very generic circumstances. But what sort of a common theme would you sort of maybe walk through with someone?
I would say that if I'm sitting down with an individual and we're going to try to work on a financial plan, what I'm trying to do for that individual is to build their wealth, preserve their wealth, and find a way to ultimately transfer that wealth in the most tax efficient manner. The pillars to accomplish that are varied. I would want a component would be budgeting, cash flow management. A secondary one would be insurance planning, investment planning, retirement planning, tax planning, and ultimately estate planning.
Got it.
So all those pillars, and as you said, Chen, some individuals are going to focus more on certain pillars rather than others, but really all we're trying to accomplish is that an individual builds their wealth, preserves their wealth, and transfers their wealth, leaving the legacy that they want.
Absolutely. So that's interesting. So it's all about being able to build, preserve, and transfer your wealth in the most tax efficient manner at the end of the day, right? So if we were to just maybe sort of go back to budget and cash flow planning, what are we looking at? Like, when you say budgeting and cash flow planning, what ultimately are we trying to accomplish with anybody within that space?
I think it's really important for an individual and a family to know where exactly they're spending their money on a monthly basis.
Right.
There are so many people living paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
And yet some of these people living paycheck to paycheck actually make a very good living.
Right.
And they always express surprise to me that despite this good living and the good income that the family makes,
right,
there doesn't seem to be anything at the end of the month to save.
Right.
And these are individuals that would sometimes be shocked when they realize, oh my God, I've spent $100 on Starbucks coffees. Oh my God, we've spent $300-400 on going out to eat at restaurants. So when I say cash flow planning and budgeting, it's just making sure that you understand where your money is going to, because if you know where you're spending your money, you'll know what you could cut back on and what you should invest a bit more money in.
Got it. So budgeting and cash flow, just simply understanding where's the money coming from, where is it actually going? Is it towards necessities? Is it towards wants? Is it towards needs? Are we investing that money at the end of the day? Just being able to identify exactly how we are spending that money at the end of the day. So now sort of maybe moving on right from budgeting and cash flow to a second pillar within the realm of wealth management per se, is we talked about insurance planning. That's something that's very near and dear to you as well, and obviously it has plenty of benefits with it. Talk to us a little bit about insurance planning and some of the benefits of that at the end of the day.
Well, as you said, Chen, it is probably the one that's most near and dear to me. I entered this career because my father passed away at an early age,
right,
and he had 3 kids and a wife. And I saw how it left my mom still in a position to have to work. 2 of the 3 sons had to somehow find a way to balance education with now finding work so that we could provide for the family. And I think when people look at financial planning, when they want to talk about financial planning, they want to talk about the investment side. And they don't really put much time in the insurance side. And I always will tell people, it's like buying a house. The investment side of financial planning is the part of the house you see above the ground. It's what looks nice, it's what's pretty, it's what you imagine. But no one would want to buy a house if they thought that the foundation of the house, the part underneath the ground, was cracking and not properly built. The foundation of any good financial plan is that you're protecting the most important asset that you have, which is your ability to continue to make an income. And what insurance planning is simply if I'm in a position where I can't make that income anymore, God forbid if I pass away too soon, I become disabled, I become ill, how is my family going to be looked at? And so one of the things that when I'm talking to an individual is, yeah, we'll get to the investment planning, we'll get to the tax planning, but first and foremost, we need to take care of the insurance planning. We need to make sure that the foundation is properly built.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that because it's almost like the fancier stuff that's above the ground is what everybody wants to talk about, right? Like, whether it be stocks, whether it be cryptocurrency, whether it be real estate, regardless of what it is. We all love talking about that, but nobody really likes to talk about, they kind of consider insurance as the sort of the boring aspect of things, and nobody really wants to put in, systems in place that, God forbid, if anything was to happen to you. And when we talk about insurance planning, a lot of people sort of automatically sort of go to death as sort of the only thing, and nobody really thinks about, what if I actually get hit by a bus today when I go out, or a car, and if I can't work for another 6 months, 1 year, how am I going to make sure the income continues to come in, right? Because we can have the house and we have a huge mortgage on it, but if we don't have the ability to be able to pay for that at the end of the day, how are we going to be able to sustain and preserve everything that we've built so far at the end of the day, right? So the second pillar that we talked about, insurance planning. So we talked about cash flow and budgeting. We talked about insurance planning. Let's sort of move on to a third pillar within the financial planning side of things, which is investments and retirement planning per se, right? What do people usually talk about within that space?
Well, to me, you're going to build your wealth. Remember what we said, the first component of a good financial plan is to build your wealth.
Right.
And in Canada, you're going to build your wealth in 3 ways. You're going to earn an income, you're going to invest that money, and maybe you'll get a windfall in the form of a lottery or an inheritance. I don't believe any person should try to base their financial plan on the hopes of winning a lottery or getting an inheritance. So then it comes down to income and investments. Income is that you work for your money.
Yeah.
Investments is now having your money work for you. And you got to take some of that income, somewhere between 10 and 20%, and you got to make sure that you're investing it properly. And investment planning simply means, am I setting aside enough for an emergency fund? Am I setting enough aside for my children's education? And all the while, am I setting enough aside so that I can retire when I no longer feel like working? How am I going to invest? Is it going to be balanced? Is it going to be too risky, not risky enough? Am I going to be paying too much tax on that investment? These are all things that people got to factor when it comes to investment planning.
Got it. So we talked about cash flow and budget aspect of it. Then we talked about building that foundation of making sure, hey, we got to make sure we have a foundation. If everything falls apart, we still have something to fall back on. And now we're talking about sort of building and sort of accumulating that wealth, and that's through investment planning and retirement planning at the end of the day, right? And then, of course, as we sort of, build on investment and retirement planning, something that comes up quite a bit is everybody hates the fact that we always pay a lot of taxes.
Exactly.
And that's where sort of tax planning comes into play. Typically, what have you seen sort of as optimal tax strategies? Again, I'm not going to get into very specifics of tax strategies here per se, but in tax planning in general, what are we looking at for a consumer or for a family at the end of the day?
Well, now we're transitioning from building your wealth to preserving your wealth. And when we think of preserving your wealth, what are the factors that will most likely cause somebody to lose some of the wealth that they were able to build? Well, one is, am I keeping up with inflation? Sometimes it's excessive spending, bad investment decisions. But the biggest one in Canada is the role that taxes plays.
Absolutely.
It's a double-edged sword. It's great to build wealth, but the curse that comes with building wealth is you are finding ways to give CRA a lot more of the income that you've worked so hard for. And there's a lot of areas that tax planning, a proper tax plan can take shape. Are you taking advantage of the vehicles that the government has given you to avoid paying tax in the form of a TFSA, an RRSP, And believe it or not, Chen, a big one where you can have your cake and eat it is while you are protecting your family using traditional insurance products, a lot of people don't know that growth inside of an insurance product grows on a tax deferred basis. And so making sure that somebody is having a way to take as much of the income that they've saved, taking it from investments that are currently taxed, and moving those investments into vehicles where you do not have to pay tax, or you can defer the tax to a point in your life where you'll be in a lower tax bracket. And so that's one area. And when we get to the topic of transferring wealth, the other area where people pay taxes, they've accumulated this big estate, they want to pass on that estate to their next generation, and they're shocked when they find out how much they're going to have to give to CRA in the form of tax. So that's when we look at tax planning, that's what we're looking at is you've built wealth, that wealth now is generating a return. How do you find a way to maximize the return, but get to keep most of that return without paying tax on that return?
Absolutely. So the important thing is it's not just about building wealth, but how do you sort of build it in a fashion that it's tax optimized, so that we are minimizing taxes, within the parameters of what's actually given to us or allowed by CRA at the end of the day, right? So that's tax planning. And then you sort of touched on the next concept of, estate planning per se, which is, hey, now that you've built up all these assets, we're doing everything we can to sort of preserve those assets. How do we now transfer it to the next generation in the tax efficient manner? And that's where estate planning comes into play, right? Talk to us a little bit about estate planning in general.
Well, estate planning, I think, is one of the most overlooked things in my experience. I've always been surprised, Chen, at people will cross the street and do somersaults if it means they can save paying $1 less tax. And yet that philosophy they had of trying to pay as little tax as possible while they were living seems to go by the wayside at death. They seem to not have any issues with having 30-40% of their hard-earned estate be given to CRA. It's been said that in the next 10 years, we are going to see $1 trillion of wealth passed on from one generation to the next. Yeah. And the people who are the most excited about that is CRA, because they know they're going to get their chunk. Right. And a good financial plan is a plan that ensures that you pay what you need to. There's an old saying, you have to pay the tax bill, but you don't have to leave a tip, right? There are tools on how to transfer estates, trusts, a properly worded will, but the area and the tool that I think has been proven to be the best is the use of a life insurance policy, because a life insurance policy passes on the proceeds of the policy in a tax-free benefit, and it's basically the tax-free benefit of the insurance policy that's paying CRA what they're requiring, and the majority of your estate is being passed on to your loved ones. And the use of charitable giving. That's something that's become very popular these days, is one of the things that the government will allow you and your estate to lower your tax bill is donations to charity. And it serves two purposes, Chen. You are finding a way to make something near and dear to you a little bit better by your contribution, and at the same time, it's helping you and your estate lower its tax bill. And I've been talking to people about, you've worked really hard and you've built a life of success, and now work with a planner to show you how that life of success can become a life of significance.
Amazing. I think you touch on various aspects of it. So estate planning in general, we want to make sure when we are moving assets from one generation to the other, how do we sort of do that in the most tax efficient manner? That's estate planning in general. I know you touched on various strategies that can be used, whether it be something as simple as, making sure your beneficiaries are listed on some of your registered investments, or making sure you have a properly worded will so that everything that's, the way that you envision to happen after your passing, it happens in that right way. And people make a huge mistake sometimes of thinking that, hey, regardless if I have a will or not, everything will go to my son, daughter, XYZ. But if something is being contested in the courts of law, it makes the process of giving what you intend to give someone makes it significantly harder at the end of the day, right? So we want to make sure everybody has a will in place. You alluded to trust. Family trust could be whether it be some type of a testamentary trust, or whether it be a trust, depending on a spousal trust, for example. Regardless of what it is, there are certain goals. If you want to be able to achieve them, these tools become sort of, available for you to be able to do it. The other thing that you sort of, obviously, at the end of the day, there might be capital gain implication, whether we like it or not, in various forms. But instead of and I think this was in the news articles just a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of baby boomers sort of leave their cottages to their grandkids. And if the grandkids are not able to pay for the capital gain taxes, they'll end up having to liquidate that cottage in order to pay for that capital gain tax.
Exactly. Not just the cottage, the family business. Those are two big assets. When I talk to individuals and I ask them what are they hoping to leave to the next generation, they'll say their family cottage and the family business. And what they don't realize is that a cottage and a business is a capital asset.
Right.
And hopefully the value of the cottage is increased and the value of your business has increased.
Exactly.
And that's the good news. But the bad news is that you haven't really paid tax on the growth of those assets, but you do at death.
Right.
And so you may be burdening your child or your grandchildren. You think you're doing them a favor by leaving them the family business and the cottage.
Right.
And CRA is going to be knocking on the door asking them to have a hefty tax bill paid. And most of the time, as you mentioned, the only way they could come up with the money to pay
is by
liquidating the assets you wanted them to have. Exactly.
Absolutely. And that's where you gave another alternative, which is life insurance.
Exactly.
Providing that liquid cash flow, God forbid, if something was to happen, for pennies in the dollars, there's a solution that's probably going to be able to help fund your capital gain taxes. And that's where life insurance comes into play, right? And then, of course, the last aspect of it was the charitable giving strategy.
Exactly.
You've led a life of success. How do you now turn that success into a life of significance? And I have this conversation all the time with some of my clients. How do you actually want to be remembered?
Exactly.
What is your legacy when do you want to make sure that you're sort of, putting out a name for yourself that your grandkids actually will remember you at the end of the day, right? So and then of course we're doing it in two ways, which is, hey, the legacy will be there so that you can help your most favorite charity. At the same time, depending on how we structure some of these things, the tax benefits of providing a charitable donation could have a significant impact on that terminal tax return, for your estate at the end of the day, right? So that's awesome, Vince. So we talked about, various different aspects. We talked about how do you sort of build your wealth at the end of the, to begin off with, and that aspect of it, whether it be, starting off with looking where your money is coming from, where is your money going, and then being able to identify sources where we can actually take that money, invest it so that we can, essentially grow your wealth. The second part of it is sort of preserving your wealth. And preserving your wealth comes in a couple of different aspects of it. Everything from making sure you have proper insurance plan in place. So God forbid, if there was any emergencies or anything that sort of unexpected events that come your way, you're able to sort of keep up with those assets. That's one aspect of it. The second part of it is how do you sort of, whether it's going to be taxes, whether it's going to be inflation, whether it's going to be making bad investment decisions, how do you sort of balance, how do you have that balancing effect? And that's sort of the wealth preservation aspect of it.
Yeah.
And the third part we talked about was the wealth transfer. Now that you've built all of these assets, whether it be the family cottage, whether it be real estate, whether it be your business that you built up and you preserved it, making sure that, it stood the test of time, how do you now sort of transfer it from your generation to the next generation in the most tax efficient manner at the end of the day, right? And we want to be able to make sure that we put the strategies in place. So you might end up still having to pay some taxes, but how do you sort of minimize that in the most tax efficient manner? So wealth building, wealth preservation, wealth transfer in the most tax efficient manner. And one thing that sort of came to my mind, and I sort of have one of the hardest answers to these hardest conversations sometimes when I sit with my clients is, there's also something about legal guardianship for minor children when we talk about from an estate planning perspective, or when we talk about sort of wills at the end of the day, right? Can you maybe share a bit of your experience with conversations you've had? What is the importance of it? Because I think it's important to know, because, hey, and truth be told, Vince, I have a newborn, obviously, but until I had my daughter, the conversation was very easy for me when I had it with my clients, because it didn't necessarily hit home at the end of the day. But when I sat down one day and I'm like, okay, if God forbid, if something was to happen to me and my wife, who is now going to be sort of responsible for my child? Talk to us a little bit about, based on your experience.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up. Chen, sometimes these are difficult conversations to have. My goodness, you're experiencing the joy of your first child. And I'm going to tell you, this is a time where you and your wife need to talk about, God forbid, what happens if both of you were to perish at the same time. And we somehow, many people have this belief that if I don't talk about it, it means it's not going to happen.
Right.
You know, God rest his soul, my dad was approached by an insurance advisor. And he didn't purchase because he was of an old-fashioned belief that if I was to somehow get insurance, I was giving God permission to have something happen to me.
Right.
Well, something happened to him even without buying.
Right.
Not having the conversation will not prevent tragedy from happening. And in an example of two parents of a newborn, the belief they just have is that if, God forbid, something was to happen to both of us, you know, my sister will be able to take care of the child, or my parents will be able to take care of the child. And they're shocked when they find out that the decision on who's going to look after the child will be made by the government.
Exactly.
And when they hear that, it's like, well, how do they know what our intentions were? Well, without a will, they don't know what your intentions were. And so I always think, have the difficult conversations, put the plan in place, make sure you have a will that states what you want to have happen to your family or your minor children. It may be a difficult conversation for a short time, but then the peace of mind that you're going to have the rest of your life, you can't put a price on
Absolutely. That. Absolutely. No, Vince, I think you made it super clear. I think the most important part is have a conversation.
Exactly.
And that's the one thing that we're trying to inspire people to do through some of these podcasts, is just start the conversation. You may or may not have the right answer at the end of the day, right from the get-go. But if you never start the conversation, you're never going to be thinking about some of the actuality that you need to think about from an entirety, in its own, right? Vince, talk to me a little bit about the best financial advice that you've got. I've heard you say this, many different times. Talk to me about the best financial advice you got from someone.
The best financial advice I ever got was when I was 11 years old, and it was from the best financial advisor that I ever met, my mom. And people are stunned when I say that. And when I was 11 years old, I got my first job. I was a paper boy. It shows you how old I am, Chen, that we actually used to deliver newspapers to people's homes. And at the end of the first 2 weeks, it was a Sunday and it was time to pick up the payments.
Exactly.
And people would pay for the 2 weeks that they got the paper, and then they would give a little tip to the nice little delivery boy. And I remember coming home, Chen, with my first paycheck, but also $2.36 in tips.
Right on.
And I quickly went with my older brother and we put all the coins on the floor and we started thinking about all the candy and all the toys we were going to buy. And I guess my mom passed by and saw that, and she told me that put the money aside and that she was going to take me somewhere the next day. Well, Chen, the next day, Monday, we went to the local bank. It was a CIBC about 5 minutes from our home.
Amazing.
And with tears in my eyes, she made me open up a savings account. And all the money that I thought I was going to be spending on candy and toys got put into a savings account.
Got it.
And it taught me that it's great to make income.
Yeah.
But that income is useless if you don't save part of that income. And at an early age, I learned the benefits of saving money. About 6 months, 7 months later, when I wanted to buy a bike, I actually was able to have saved enough to help pay for that bike. And I would not have had that.
From the income you earn, you break it down, figure out where your expenses are, and make sure before you have any expenses that you have to pay somebody else, think of like you have a bill at the bank.
Exactly.
You got to pay yourself first before you pay anybody else at the end of the day. Whether that paying yourself is to build an emergency fund that you want to build so that in case something happens, you have 3 months of income to be able to, or 3 or 6 months of income you have to be able to fall back on, or whether it's to make sure that you're investing it towards purchasing something that's near and dear to you that's coming down at the end of the day, right? So from a financial planning perspective, understand where the money is going, where's the money is coming from, understand where it's going, but wherever it's going, make sure you pay yourself first as sort of a starting point to a good financial plan. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and it sounds simple, but we live in a world where everyone's doing the opposite. They spend first, and then at the end, if they have any left over, that's what they save. But you know what? You don't usually have anything left over. And I like what you said about treat it like a bill.
Yeah.
I have personal experience because my lovely wife did that at the early part of our marriage, where she would put savings, but she wouldn't put it in our monthly budget under the column of savings. She put it under the monthly budget under the column of expenses.
Right.
We had a bill, the bank bill, that had to be paid every month.
Right.
The way we thought we had to pay a hydro bill, the way we had to pay our water bill or our phone bill, we had to pay this bank bill, but it was savings. And it just built a belief that once we got that bill out of the way, what was left over? Let's use to spend and live our life. Exactly.
Perfect. So let's do a quick crash course rundown of financial planning, a sound financial plan without complicating anything. What are some things that we need to do? So first, we make sure we get the income and we review the income for where some of the leaks are, where the expenses are, because that'll help us identify what some of the disposable income that we should have in order to invest at the end of the day, right? That's sort of doing a quick exercise to identify where the money is going. Pay yourself first. Build up, whether it be towards an emergency fund, whether it be towards an investment. Make sure you pay yourself first before you sort of do anything else at the end of the day. Just in general, we always usually suggest clients to make sure they have 6 months of income as 6 months of income or expenses as sort of an emergency fund. And that's something that you would always want to build.
For sure.
And then you want to make sure that you have the right protection plans in place. And that's to protect your income more than anything else. So that's making sure, God forbid, you're not able to work in case of an accident, in case of an illness, whether I like it or not. God forbid, if I don't show up one day to my house, my family, Ruby and my kid, is used to a certain lifestyle based on the income that I brought to the table so far. And I want to make sure that's there for the rest of my lifetime or rest of their lifetime so that they're able to sort of maintain that standards of living. So we want to make sure we put the income protection
Exactly.
in place.
And you know, I always try to keep things as simple as possible. And when people think that it's important to insure their assets, it is. When most people think of the assets they insure, they think of their automobile, they think of their home. When I ask an individual what their greatest or most valuable asset is, other than the family, asset-wise, it is their ability to earn an income.
Amazing.
And it makes no sense to me that you're busy insuring your home, you're busy insuring your car, you're maybe insuring your boat or some of the possessions you have, but you don't insure your income. You know what it reminds me of, Chen? That parable of the man who had the golden goose? Who had the goose, and the goose laid the golden eggs.
Right.
And as the goose laid the eggs, he thought it was very important to insure the eggs. But he didn't really put any onus in insuring the goose. In fact, he got so greedy that one day he said, I'm going to kill this goose and I'm going to see what's inside it because I want all the eggs now. And then realized that, well, once the goose was killed, there were no more eggs to be had. The golden eggs are your assets, but the goose is the income that
actually
provides these eggs for you. And that's the first thing that you should be.
Absolutely. It's almost like making sure that foundation is strong. So God forbid, if something was to break down or come down on you, you have something to stand back on. So we talked about budgets and cash flow, emergency fund, paying yourself first, obviously protecting those necessary assets, income, everything else. Then we obviously sort of get into the wealth accumulation strategies, and part of that is whether it be paying for your children's education, whether it be saving for retirement, whether it be having any other types of investment goals or needs that you might have. You start building towards those at the end of the day, right? And then we sort of look at things like tax planning, estate planning. It's more so how do we preserve now those assets, and how do you transfer that to the next generation in the most tax efficient manner. So in a nutshell, that's financial planning. So just to go back, because I've had this experience quite a bit, which is, I talk to families all the time, and they think financial planning is a very complicated and a cumbersome process. And what I've sort of realized when I talk to a lot of people is that when they think it's stressful or tedious or it's just frustrating, they don't end up taking any actions at all. Exactly. And that's the worst thing that can happen, right? You want to take the necessary steps. You want to be able to do these things. That sort of is what we sort of call the base sound financial planning. And I've had this discussion with some of my counterparts at some of the big banks, and I'm like, don't you guys feel ashamed to set your clients up for failures? Because we completely ignore that insurance conversations. We're talking about the investment conversations because that's the most fancy, the sexiest things to talk about. But we don't often realize that if something was to fall apart, the clients have nothing else. And the worst thing that they'll end up doing is they'll actually dip into their savings to access money because of the immediate emergencies that'll come their way, that it derails everything that they're building their money for.
I'm glad you mentioned that. It's RSP season.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people making sound financial decisions by contributing to their RRSP. And the first R and the second R of a RRSP is a retirement. This is a plan that is intended for your retirement.
Right.
What a lot of people don't realize is that the number one factor where somebody will have to dip into their retirement savings is to pay for a major medical unexpected emergency that came up. And I always will talk to a client and say, if we could find a way that your retirement fund can be saved until you retire and you don't lose the interest growth on that, if I could show you a way that we can give you funds for an emergency medical, wouldn't that give you more ease of mind? And that's where financial planning, and you're right, it's sometimes not the sexiest part, but it is the necessary part. We live in a world, a life, and everybody has goals with their life. Everybody has aspirations with their life. Chen, I'm putting you on the spot, but what's the two letters that are in the middle of the word life?
If.
In everyone's life, in the middle of everyone's life is the word if. What if I was to pass on too soon? What if I was to become sick or disabled? That is the first and foremost. We should be handling the if in the middle of life. And once you've taken care of that, and the thing that I try to tell individuals is it may seem stressful, it may seem like a difficult conversation, but once it's taken place, you sleep better. You sleep more at ease, and you know that, God forbid, whatever was to happen, your family is taken care of.
Absolutely.
And we need to talk a bit more about that.
Absolutely. Vince, thank you so much for sort of, just shedding the light, sort of just opening up that conversation just about financial planning in general, the importance of insurance planning within the financial planning side of it. But we didn't just stop there. We talked about the whole spectrum. How do you build, preserve, and then transfer your wealth in the most tax efficient manner?